In this episode, I am joined by James Ellis, independent researcher, writer, host of the Hermitix podcast, and founder of the online magical school, the Hermitage. James traces his spiritual journey, including New Atheism, explorations in the occult, Gurdjieff work, conversion to and deconversion from Catholicism, and the founding of his online magic school, the Hermitage. James offers his critique of magical protection practices, recounts his experiences of summoning demons of the Goetia, and explains his approach to spiritual teaching. James also describes his years of alcoholism, the complexities of British class culture, the awakening of his intellectual potential, his graduate studies in Continental Philosophy, why he did not enjoy reading Homer's Odyssey, and the pros and cons of talking in stories. So without further ado, James Ellis. James Ellis, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited.
Well, I'm so pleased to be talking with you today. And I've enjoyed many episodes of your podcast, Hermitix, which you give a lot of lecture content on there about all sorts of things. And you also conduct really thoughtful and deep interviews, which I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed both of those aspects of the podcast. And a lot of that, I think, now is also flowing into the Hermitage, your new school that you've begun only in the last, I think, month or two. You watched it, yeah. So I'd like to talk about all that stuff. But actually, that is, in a sense, a little bit of the recent public face of your work. But there's been a lot before that. Odysseus, I'm just thinking of Odysseus because of the film Odyssey's coming out. He's polytropos, right? Man of many ways, or if you want Emily Wilson, complicated, I think she says.
Okay. I'll say this before, as you mentioned it, I don't mind the Emily Wilson translation. It's my preferred one, actually.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah. I'm going to ask you, that's going to be my first question then. So, but you are polyonymous, man of many names, metanomad, James Ellis, James Ellis, I think maybe a couple of others. So I'm very curious and each of these represents, in a sense, I think, a phase of your own work and a phase of what your explorations and so on. So very curious to explore all that with you. Okay, before we get into it then, tell me about Emily Wilson.
It's nothing overcomplicated. What it is that after a while, with books that are supposedly difficult to read or known to be a bit of a slog, and people say various translations, however many translations there are, and you just get to this point, I think it's a point of intellectual maturity, actually, where you say, I just want to read it. And that was the translation that I found that was the most accessible just to get through. Because otherwise you end up pushing yourself through something for sort of idealistic reasons for, I'm not going to go be a classics scholar. I just wanted to read the damn thing. So, and I didn't really enjoy it all that much anyway. So, there you go.
You're talking about the Odyssey here. You're going to read the Odyssey. And of course, there are many different translations of the Odyssey. Emily Wilson's is a very popular one lately. And, like with any translation, people have quibbled with certain translation choices she made and so on. But there are many other translations too, Lattimore, Fagles, Butler, whatever you like. So, but you didn't like the Odyssey then. Tell me about that.
We're really veering off somewhere I didn't expect to go, actually. It didn't really interest me. I've had to admit over time that I am a man, despite you mentioned all these phases that I've gone through. In one of the phases, I wrote these essays that I was somewhat online known for at the time, called Exiting Modernity. But as I've developed, let's say, I've come to this place of acceptance that I am a modern man, and the mature position is to have some sort of acceptance with that. And so the same thing with classical music, actually, that a lot of it really I have to accept, no, this is boring. And as beautiful as much of the Odyssey or the Iliad might have been, there's something there that didn't do it for me. I mean, a lot of classics don't. Maybe it's just a case of taste, but yeah. So I haven't got too much to say there, other than you just mentioned the translation. And I know a couple of people blocked me on X for saying that I liked the Emily Wilson translation. That was enough to irk them, shall we say? Yeah,
That's interesting.
So I don't have too much to say really on that. You're a classics man.
I like them. Yeah, I'm not asking because it's necessarily
Okay.
my thing. I'm mainly surprised. It's just a cool thing to have brought up in the first few minutes before we turn towards you. But was it? Do you think
Okay.
it was the plot, or was it the style, the sort of epic style, or what do you think it was about it that didn't grab you? Do you like other kind of fiction?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, my favorite fiction writers are actually a lot of Americans, but Cormac McCarthy, William Gaddis, Herman Melville. I think there's just a certain, but then, I do, one of my favorite books is Apuleius' is The Golden Ass, for instance. So it's not a case of back in time. I just, maybe it's something very pragmatic, right? For instance, I've never gelled well with Dostoevsky, and one of the reasons I could put that down in a pragmatic sense is keeping track of all the names. And I felt the same thing with the Iliad and the Odyssey, that I didn't want to sit around and remember all these ins and outs and the names. Like it didn't flow too well in terms of keeping track of the story. I mean, the same thing actually. I can't remember his name, but there's this beautiful sung version of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Mm.
And even if you can't understand the language, something about it comes through that when you read it, you realize that these are oral tales, and that's really how they're intended to be spoken. And I might be wrong about I'm fairly sure that's the case with the Odyssey and the Iliad. Am I wrong? I don't know. I'm showing my complete ignorance already.
Well, it's only,
Yeah.
only ways up from here, then, James.
Well, hopefully.
No, it's interesting, and of course, as we're recording this, the movie's come out, the Odyssey movie, and of course, it's given occasion for a lot of people to read those texts for the first time or reread them and have lots of discussions about them. So yeah, it's fun to talk about it. But you're a man of many names, anyway.
Yes.
So let's go back in time.
Mhm.
I'm actually really interested in before all the stuff you became known for, your childhood context, actually, your upbringing. Could you say something about the context of your upbringing? You're a Brit, same as myself. What was the context there?
Goodness me. Um, well, I always make the joke, and I do stand by it because I think it's key for my spiritual development, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point, is that I was brought up, whatever that means, I was brought up Church of England. And the joke is I was brought up Church of England, which meant I became an atheist. But not Christopher Hitchens atheist, right? Not an anti-theist. So, as we'll probably get to spiritual stuff and all that in a bit, in terms of the upbringing, what Church of England did, and I assume still does, is integrate such a thin veil of religious teaching into the state curriculum that, a morning, I think there was a morning prayer or morning hymns. We sung morning hymns, and I think there was a prayer. It was the Lord's Prayer at the start of the day. There was, blimey. And the Harvest Festival and these things. They were so bureaucratically integrated into everything that like anything felt or sacred was reduced to that same flat monotone of state curriculum. And so without ever really investigating it, there was this default unconscious nod from everyone, including the teachers of, yeah, come on. It's all whatever. It doesn't really matter, but we throw it in for the sake of culture or whatever. And that really sunk down into the difference between, I mean, it's a bit of a clumsy term. I remember it being thrown around in the heyday of new atheism, but I think it was Bill Maher actually who tried to popularize this term, but it was apatheist, right? Like just doesn't, completely apathetic, just nothing. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is actually far more damaging than, say, being brought up in an explicitly secular anti-theist household, because then you got something to like bite with and wrestle with and some friction. But when it's like, a quick kind of hand wave, you then just don't know what to do with it. So that was that kind of upbringing. In terms of like my class, if we're going to do the class thing, I actually describe myself as a class mutt, because one side of my family is pheasant shooting, and we could say original upper middle class and tweed. Another side of my family is Roma, originally Roma gypsy. So my grandma was when she was young, she was in a horse-drawn traveling caravan, and read the tarot. So that's where I get that from. And she'd never tell you anything bad. And she never swore. And she was, she was a saint, really. She's one of those like everyday saint. And then because of how things worked out, I sort of ended up with like a third side, which was chain smoking and watching Mrs. Brown's Boys and going to bingo. So I had like these three concurrent streams of culture that just meant I never really fit in any of them. The middle class can sniff out someone who's got that working class mischief. The working class have a certain, and I don't mean this in the sense that they're dumb, I don't mean that at all, but they have a suspicion of someone who could go get an academic job, a comfortable academic job. I speak as someone who's worked as a carpenter for a long time with working class people, and I just didn't fit in there. And I think it was, you've been to university, what are you doing here? Like, this isn't really for you. And then the other side is, I did the whole drinking and smoking and all that for a while, and then that didn't work out. So I ended up kind of just completely not fitting in any of these. So that's a big part of the upbringing. Pretty standard upbringing. And by by that I mean, parents got divorced. Like the standard, and I really don't mean that in an unconsciously deflective way. A standard in the sense of very, very atomized. So my experience of my upbringing after a certain point was, once we all had our own screen, my brother's in his room playing video games, I'm in my room playing video games, my parents are downstairs watching soap operas, so much of possible culture just fell away, and we were living the very individualist, consumerist life. And so, yeah, I mean, where do you want me to go next? School?
Yeah.
What do you want to know about school?
Well, actually, I mean, you raised something very interesting there. Several things very interesting, and I know you're already touching on some of the themes that you've thought about and written about before. You're sort of nodding to them. This sense of not quite fitting in, being a class mutt, as you said. I wonder if you might say a bit more about that, and what do you perceive to be the consequences of that for you? Presumably, there are some disadvantages to that, but maybe some hidden advantages. What do you think?
There's advantages, and there's disadvantages, as you've said. I'd start with the working class thing. There are lessons that you can only get from a true working class culture. You can only get them there, and you can only get them there if you've got some skin in the game, in the sense that you truly understand the stakes of the possibility of, if one of the parents lost the job, we'd really be struggling. I remember times, where times were difficult, like genuine times were difficult. And that's something that just can't be replicated. You can't artificially replicate that. In the same way that being a smart aleck, which, I assume you can understand I was when I was young, and I really was for a long time. I was a right smart ass. And people used to say, you won't get very far being a smart ass. Well, I've done pretty well. And it would make some of my teachers sick to see where I've ended up. But that said, there is the archetypal figure of the specifically worldly wise working class man, who, when you're a teenage lad or a young lad who thinks they know it all, there's a distinct difference between the way I see it, at least as I see it, the way a middle class upbringing would deal with that, maybe through some sort of kind of lesson or something like this, and a working class. And the working class would very much be like just the metaphorical equivalent of a clout around the ear, right? Like, just you kind of get blasted, right? Like, just that real, I really can't describe very well, but you think you're top of the world, and someone who's, you can tell, has really been through it, just bang, and they shoot you down, not in a destructive way, but in a way that the felt sense of it, you learn more than you would through any sort of artificial lesson. It's kind of like the difference between Winnie the Pooh and the Moomins.
How so? Could you develop
Hang
that?
on. Well, Winnie the Pooh, he's got this Christopher Robin. He's got this wood, and it's all catered for him. And all the lessons of Winnie the Pooh are all about him. It's all very narcissistic, and it's all safe enough that they can artificially develop these lessons for him. So everything that happens in 100 Acre Wood, everything that happens in 100 Acre Wood is completely. Of course, it's to do with this young. Of course, it's to do with him. The world revolves around him, and yet the Moomins is like there's a comet coming, and actually you don't really. The Moomins are, the first book after the Great Flood, which is kind of the real start of the Moomins, the Comet and Moomin Land, which I've done a review of. There's a comet coming. You're not the center of this world. You may all just be obliterated and die. And that, I think, is the difference in the teaching. That for the working class, the world doesn't. You have an understanding like you got to do something. You got to do something. You got to do something quick to. Try to get ahead. But Norfolk, where I grew up, was also had a different sense of that, because you did have these people who were going to leave school and immediately join their father's company, but you also had a lot of very working class people who were immediately going to leave school and just join the farm, and they did, and you could tell because it just didn't matter. They did not, and you'd even have teachers acknowledge it. It's like, well, why are we bothering? Because they know exactly where they're going and they know exactly what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life. But again, with not again, but with most of schooling, it was always the case that if you were caught in the middle ground, that you were basically forgotten. I got straight B's, a chronic underachiever. I remember on awards day for my GCSEs. My maths teacher, he was like, everyone was going past him like, I got an A, and I was in this second top set or whatever. And he was like really like, yeah, well done with so many of them. And then it got to me and I said, yeah, I got a B. And he just shook my hand. He said, yeah, I guess so. Like it just, well, I was fine. Quite arrogantly, I never really revised. I kind of always knew what I was going to get. I mean, it sounds really arrogant now, but I don't know. It was just by school, to be honest. And but again, okay. So the main point there is if you were caught in this middle ground, you kind of lost to the system. You just trundled along. You were doing enough for them to get the statistics they needed. If you were between getting an A and a C, then that's fine. The school does well. One of the few places where I really delve into it, where I can still generate something like a quite a righteous anger, is thinking about teachers in school. There's something there I really don't like. They do a lot of damage that is so institutionalized and has this kind of institutional get out of jail free card. That any trauma in someone's life is definitely not going to be to do with schooling, even if it went fine, and as far as I'm concerned, school for everyone involved is an engine of trauma. Yeah.
I'd be very interested to hear you say a bit more about that. And particularly, I've always seen you as a very intellectual person, very intelligent person. I think anyone who visits Hermitix will see that. You do really deep dives into very complicated subjects and teach them very well. And your interviews, you also get into deep stuff. And you're considered quite the expert in several different areas, philosophical schools and things. I think so. I think you're a bit of a Nick Land expert. I know you're not such a Nick Land guy anymore, but you're brought in occasionally. I've seen you brought into places to talk about that. But anyway, seems to me like it wasn't a case of hardware problems for you. Perhaps a mismatch of method. Do you think you could have been reached in a different way if you're in a different educational context, or were you just not? You just weren't there. You weren't ready. You weren't at that place. So I mean, I'm here talking about you, but I'm also curious if you'll say something more about teachers and this engine of trauma.
Okay, I just do not know what was really happening in school. I was just going. It was fine. I was mostly interested up until, I mean, once I got a video games console, I was basically just interested in video. If I could do anything with my free time, I would, I would have chosen to play video games up until a certain point, and school just went by. Like honestly, that's all. I'm trying to really think back and feel back to like I never, I never knew what I was going to do. Never knew what I was going to do. Did not, and the same with family, and the same with future. I did not know what I wanted. I could have told you things at the time, of course. I did not know what I wanted. I did not know what I wanted to do. And there were people even at that age, 15, 16, where you talk about like, what, and it's a ridiculous age thinking back to talk about what you're going to do in your future, But there were people at that age who would be like, oh, I want a family and kids. And I guess in their mind's eye, they would think about the future and they would see something. And I still don't have this, to be honest. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. But so I just fell into what I was good at, which was art. Like and maybe that was because a teacher said, I mean, it was like the one teacher who maybe said you're kind of good at this. Retrospectively, the one award that I ever got in school was for a philosophical debate on the death penalty. Actually, it's the only award I ever got. So I guess something was there. And I know what you're going to ask. What was my position? My position, I think it was really like kind of severe. It was like no, but my argument was no death penalty unless we bring in this new form. I think I still stand by this. We bring in a new form of evidence that we've really defined that is like the equivalent of there has to be like a certain definition of video footage or something like that. So I was engaged with that. Um, and like a lot of kids who were I'm getting ahead of myself there. I was going to mention that the fact I'd watched the film Zeitgeist at a certain point, which I think you'd probably find kind of funny, maybe. Do you remember the film Zeitgeist?
Vaguely,
Okay.
it was a YouTube thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, like the kind of like the 3 hour, if you've watched this, you understand, which when you're 13, boy. So I was very much of that, like, I've got it, right? So anyway, but back to the like, so I didn't really know what school was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. And then, video games was a choice. And then at a certain point, about 14, so quite young, the video games moved to alcohol. And from 14 to 22, I was a functioning alcoholic. I was getting blind drunk twice a week. And I mean, so that whole point was just like things just happen. I mean, I did my degree in that time. I did everything in that time. But what I mean by functioning alcoholic at that point is if I'd had the spare time and the means to do so, I was going alcohol, and I only really knew that in retrospect. And I'm sure you know of this in the UK that that wasn't really looked at. The fact that I would go into school when I'm 14, 15, and we'd be mentioning, oh man, crazy weekend. We managed to talk to an older friend who got us some crates of beer and we all got absolutely lathered at 15. Teachers would know or they'd overhear and they wouldn't say anything. And it's very, very common in the UK to not have the hang on, whoa, 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 like you, and we wouldn't have listened. So, but that fell away at about 22. We can talk about that later. So that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing.
How would you have reached you?
How would I have reached me? Man, I was so certain. I was so certain. I'd made it my identity though, and I was very enamored by Christopher Hitchens and even like Kingsley Amis and Hunter S. Thompson and Bukowski, and I really felt that like living like that was somehow edgy, as you do. I mean, you know what? I feel no embarrassment about this. That was exactly the age to do it. And so many people they say things like, "Oh man, I think back to the things I did when I was 13," and I think don't regret. That's what you do when you're 13. If you think back to what you did at 13, it's a good thing. Like that's what you get the cringe out of the way. Get the get the drink, because that's what I did. And I'll talk about this later, that basically my definition of spirituality now is really what I've been doing my whole life, which is burning things down and seeing what survives. And that, I guess, in retrospect, that's what I was doing. Now, I do remember one quote from a guy I still admire. It's from Henry Rollins, and it was when I was 18, so I didn't stop drinking. But it was a Henry Rollins quote of 17, 18, and he says, if you want to get at your parents, don't get blinding drunk and wrap your car around a tree. Out earn them, outlearn them, outlive them. And I remember thinking, like, that's pretty good going. And it was the first time I'd heard someone at least be productive who was of the more alternative side, who wasn't just a kind of stiff of the system, as I probably would have phrased it then. So it began to fall away. But as all, I do genuinely believe this, as all things end, everything ends with just dissipate, just that's gone. There's no great ending. It just fades away. Same with smoking, same with drinking, same with weight loss, like overeating, which are all kind of tied together. It's just okay, that's gone for some reason. Yeah.
You were overeating at that time as well?
I was eating crap. But I mean, at that age, you can eat a lot. I mean, also, like, throughout that whole period, I was doing college, I was doing uni, so I was out and about a lot. So I never got really, really bad. I mean, I did when I was briefly worked in retail was my biggest. I was never huge or anything, but I'm just saying I was just eating crap and overeating and like just eating a lot of junk at night and stuff. So yeah, I was just completely in the everyday modern hedonism of like dopamine hit, basically.
Were you reading much in your younger days, teenage days, and so on, or did that come later?
I lucked out and had a good English teacher who now lives right near me, and I might tell the story of one great disappointment, and it really solidified for me something about schooling. I will tell it. But I had a great English teacher who managed to, and the first thing that amazed me about this English teacher in my last 2 years of school is that we were reading, we were set of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. It's fine. And something that amazed me, and it's so innocent now, he was talking about what books we were looking at that year. And then the last one he mentioned, he said, well, we're going to start with Of Mice and Men. We're going to study that for however long the term was. And he said, I don't know why we're studying this one. Grapes of Wrath is better. And something went on off in my mind that I went, holy shit, he's actually interested in reading. Like he actually mentioned another book that he voluntarily read, right? Like, what? He's like, Grapes of Wrath is better. And I said, what do you mean? Like, after the lesson, I was like, what do you mean Grapes of Wrath is better? And he just started talking about, well, the Joad family. And then I agree with him. It's maybe East of Eden, but it's a bit long-winded. Probably Grapes of Wrath is Steinbeck's best. So I do agree with him. But it was like, oh, this guy's actually interested in reading. And so then the first book he recommended me at 15, and it really was, I think, my entry into philosophy proper, we could say, and thinking proper. And it stopped me being, I was a very militant, lefty, I'm right about everything vegetarian at the time, of course, goes without saying, if you're a smart ass. And it was Straw Dogs by John Gray. And I read it and something in it clicked that, like, we can't really fight this beast, so I just stopped being vegetarian. But it was a serious book. I still kind of recommend John Gray to people. I was smart enough to read John Gray at the time, but before that, I did not grow up reading books. And if people are like, oh boy, James reads a lot, because I read a stupid amount now, I would say, look, I didn't start until I was 16, and I didn't properly start until I was about 19. And then it just I just got going. But yeah, so 16. Yeah, and I will still say to people, honestly, my smarts, my intellect, whatever that is, the majority of that is from reading a lot. Just reading a lot and always abiding by the principle of, if I found something that seems to give me the answer, as quickly as you can, jump to the other side. And the more and more you do that, that's the only way you learn. And jump back and forward in time and read everything, But that's really where, I wasn't, I'm not super, I'm not super intelligent. I know that's not me being humble. I've said before, I've met smart people, and I think intelligence is about a certain form of game playing where someone is seeing I imagine intelligence as you drop a rock into a pond. How many ripples out from the effect can someone get where they're seeing not just what the knock-on effect will be, how it affects all different forms, like a fractal. How far out can they get in the fractal? That's how I define intelligence. And of course, that means that low intelligence isn't really being dumb, it's being closed-minded, right? It's like you can only see this one step ahead because you're so blinded. Yeah, or feel one step ahead. There's different types of intelligence. Yeah.
How much do you read these days? And do you have a kind of note-taking approach or a summarizing approach or so on? Because there's reading is one thing and retaining is another, isn't it?
Yeah. So I read 2 to 3 books a week. But I will say on that, there's a caveat on that. Because when it comes to nonfiction, the majority of nonfiction have at most 5 key points. And after that, if you've got those points a lot of the time, there's a ton of filler in there. So the whole and a lot of those books are short. Like if I was reading more fiction, I think it would probably only be like one a week. As for note taking, when it comes to the podcast, I'm reading in a distinct way. I'm reading in the sense of the audience. I'm thinking about what are the key points they're trying to get across with if there's an argument or a philosopher, and what questions would bring out this in the most robust, accessible way, and what discursive approach would bring this out in the most helpful way. So I'm reading in a very specific way when it comes to the podcast. I don't take notes. As I said, I never revised. I never, like, underlining books doesn't really make sense to me. I think in terms of what you've said, retention is about use. There's essays I wrote for my master's on Levinas that would be new to me now because I haven't used Levinas in, what is that now? 10 years, getting old. Same with Nick Land. Like when I did the Land Klages chat recently, it was like, there was a time when I could have told you about every essay in Fang Numina, and now I haven't used it in a long time, So, yeah.
How many hours a day is that? I mean, you must have some sort of a routine, or at least a rhythm, a general rhythm you keep to with your reading.
No. I read in the morning, when I'm having my coffee, and I read in bed for a couple hours. And I usually read with lunch. I mean, it's probably at most three hours, but I find a lot of time. So I find that a lot of people, when they say they struggle to find the time for things, it often is the case. Again, blaming the modern world. We do a lot of, there's something about the way the modern world is set up has ingrained in us this idea of that a certain thing has to finish before we can begin something else. And so I do a lot of things throughout the day, like I'm doing body stuff, like I'm doing Reich body stuff, or I might do a meditation, or there's a lot of things I want to be engaged with. And I personally, some people would say, well, that's kind of undisciplined. I call it flexi discipline because we're busy and things need to mold and change to that busyness. And if you begin to sit down and like, I have to allot this time, then before you know it, you're sort of sitting down and you need 5 minutes to even prepare for the meditation. And so I talk to people about how about keeping a book in the kitchen, and while your thing is baking, for 20 minutes you read. 20 minutes of reading, you're actually going to get more done than you think. Or 20, your thing's cooking in the other oven or whatever, and go sit and do a breathing exercise you've heard about for 15 minutes. Now that might seem a bit haphazard, but it's a way to sort of imbue your life with joy and mystery and meaning, but also means you don't let time slip away from you, because often what you'll do with those like in between times is like, well, I can't do anything else, so I'll sit down and grab my phone, or I sit down and kind of do nothing. So that's where I get a lot of reading done, actually, is what I call in between time, but always at night and always in the morning, always in bed. I don't have a problem with reading heavy ideas before going to sleep. It doesn't bother me.
You don't dream about Foucault chasing you through a field or something?
Why did you think of Foucault? Why did?
Just thinking of a scary sounding philosophical name, really.
Uh, no, 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 no. I don't think I've ever had a dream with Foucault in. I'm not huge on Foucault. Gives me a weird feeling.
Oh, maybe that's why he's chasing you.
He's not. It's never happened.
I'm just being silly, I suppose.
Okay.
That's very interesting. So, what about this fine art undergrad and then you went on to do a master's? Were they in quick succession, or was there a gap between those? And what happened at 22? You said something significant happened.
So I went from school. I went to do a BTEC in art. Again, really lucked out with a great teacher, big influence on my life there. He's just retired, actually. And and the key thing with him was he was a great artist. So it's a real rare gem of, because most teachers can't do. That's why they're there. We didn't touch on that, the trauma thing. I'll just briefly say, because we did touch on it, and I think some people would be. We live in a sort of self-care world where everyone's told to go to therapy, and I just feel that if you were to say, look, actually, I think even if you weren't bullied in school, the imposition of basically being captured for 8 years of your life when your energy is blasting out of you and your hormones are skyrocketing and everything in that place is frustrating you physically. You have to stay sat under fluorescent lighting, and you have to stay sat cross-legged with a load of strangers. If we transpose this to adult life, you realize how ridiculous it is. You have to stay. Well, this is my day. Maybe things have changed, but I think it's got worse in my opinion. You have to stay sat down. You can't move. You have to listen to something that's probably boring you out of your mind. You have to ask to go to the toilet. You often have to ask to remove clothing if you're hot. You can't leave, because if you leave, your parents will go to jail. There is an implicit threat if you leave. And on this goes. And we're slowly given little more seeds of freedom, as if to say, like, which then lulls us into this idea that adult life is freedom. And you get people fetishizing, like, oh, I've got my car and I'm paying taxes, as if that's kind of free. But anyway, bring that back to school. The more and more you look at it, people will say, well, people eventually will just have to say, well, that's life. And there's not many people that just, I think, have the courage to say, no, that's cruelty. And for me, where the anger is for that is that I do believe anyone implicit in that is very cruel. And even if you weren't, and I wasn't bullied, I'm talking about this as someone who had a straight run in school that was just completely fine. That also was relatively popular and didn't have any horrible stuff happening. That I can't imagine what it's like if going to school was filled with dread. I can only imagine that was awful. But the general level of schooling is one of complete repression and frustration, and what that is a form of normalization. That it was normal to stifle your sexual desires, stop necking off with that girl when that's absolutely what you want to do at 13 and natural and fun. Stop running around, stop too much running, stop, and then, a weird not allowing of either gender's natural disposition. Just a culling of freedom. And that's what I mean. And the normalization and internalization of that, as far as I'm concerned, is an internalization of trauma. And because the majority of therapy is of that same system, roughly speaking, they're going to be very, very reluctant to say, maybe it's just your experience of school and actually you've shoved a ton of stuff down that we need to say it's fine to express yourself. It's fine to want to leave a room. It's fine to say no to people. That's a big thing that school ingrains, is you have to be here. And not only do you have to be here, you have to like it. And you're not allowed to just say, no, I don't want to do this and I don't like you and I don't want to be here. So that's what I mean by that. So anyway, went through college, lucked out with the art teacher who was a very good artist himself, so it's a very rare thing. And he taught me a lot of good lessons. And one of the lessons that he taught me was just in this sentence that he always had, which was, don't tell me what you're going to do, show me what you've done. Like he hated people saying, I'm going to do that. So that really instilled in me this idea of like, just action, action, which I still to this day, I'm just, people are like, how are you as productive as I am? I don't even think about it. Just get on with it, get it done. And then, so yeah, no break between that and university where I studied fine art. And then there was a year break between fine art and the master's in continental philosophy so I could get government funding. So yeah, but pretty much straight through.
And something happened to you at 22, it seems.
You mean with the quitting alcohol?
Yeah, you said we'll come back to that. I wonder if
Okay.
perhaps it was a significant event or something.
Well, I think it's significant because it's the first one I can remember of what I would call burning away. So in those days, I was working in retail at the time, and every Friday, well, it was every Friday and Saturday I'd be down the pub, but also every Tuesday, and then it got to Sundays, blah, blah, blah. But I was down the pub on a Friday, and in those days, if I'd had 2 beers, or if I'd had 3 beers, so 3 was like, we're going, right? We're continuing. And I'd had 3 beers that night, and I can still vividly remember this. And I was stood outside in this courtyard of the pub, a real drinkers pub too. There's not too many of them left, it seems. People and drinking's falling off, which I'm very happy about. That's why the pubs are closing, I feel. Anyway, I'd had 3, and my friends, from friends were there. There was enough people to have a good night. And as it was, and as it had been for the last 8 years, if I had that 3rd beer, then we'd be going until close, and then we'd find someone's house to go back to, and we'd just keep going. And I remember finishing the 3rd beer, putting it down, and slowly looking around, and really, this is in like retrospect, but this is kind of what happened. It's like the whole scene just was, and I could see it for what it was, and just this deep, nothing intellectual about it, internalization of this is not what you want for this just isn't happening anymore. And I remember just putting the beer down, and I just said to my closest friend at the time, who always used to come to the pub with me, I said, I'm going to head off. And admittedly, in the years since then, I've had a couple of slip-ups, but, at most I've kind of drunk 4 or 5 more times. And they've just been, yeah. But at that point, it was just done. It's gone. It just burned out, completely burned out. And I just started getting, productive. I got in shape, and there was also a lesson in that, though, that you can't put, this is how I phrase it. So when sometimes people ask me about, like, because I've quit smoking, I've quit drinking, and I've lost weight, and they'll say, like, do you have any advice? And I say, well, the sort of one, it's to do with the self that you apparently are, and the story that you're currently telling yourself. But the sort of tragedy that you're going to have to go through is you can't pull one cog out of a machine and expect the whole machine to keep working. So you can't take out, cigarette smoking is as important to that whole story as any other part of that cog. Overeating is as important. And you're not going to know what else is going to have to fall away when that cog is pulled out. And so, oh yeah, you stopped drinking, well done. Yeah, I also lost 95% of my friends. I also lost all my socialization. I also lost a huge part of my identity. I also, in retrospect, for about 6 months was like kind of walking, what the hell do I do? Because with drinking, as I said, it was like such a key thing. It was like working with in the back of your mind going like Friday soon, Friday soon. And anyone who used to drink a lot will know this, that you drink on Friday, you get rid of your hangover on Saturday by drinking. Sunday, you're nursing the hangover. Then you're back to work. Then you have a few, and there's enough little anchors throughout the week that the whole thing is actually about that. And when you remove that one cog, it's like, no, there goes your identity. Now what? So that, like, my advice is like, just you have to be ready to lose everything. Um, so, but that was my first experience of like what I'd call burning away. Yeah.
Why continental philosophy? Why did you do a master's in that? And what is it?
I don't know what it is. Why did I do? Okay, why did I do it? Well, it turns out I'm naturally lazy. So you'll notice by the flexi discipline I think I mentioned is about my life has been a series of ways to creatively overcome my natural preponderancy for laziness. And I don't think you need to try and not be lazy. It's not going to work. It's like I no longer, I tried. I have a stack of journals that are all 10 pages in, right? And they're all, nine of them start, this time I'll really do it. And I never can fucking journal, right? And eventually you go like, okay, look, you need a different route. And what I do is just keep paper around and I'll just write it down or post-it notes. And so it's ways of creatively getting rid of my laziness. Now, the reason I mention that is, turns out to be an artist, you can't be lazy. Artists have to work really, visual artists have to work really hard. But it turned out I was far better at the theory than the actual art. So I was like, well, I kind of enjoy the theory more than the art. I'm better at thinking about it and talking about it. So continental philosophy has this overlap with art theory and critical theory, and so you can kind of apply with an art degree, and there's an understanding there and a use case. And so, yeah, that was the reason yeah, one reason was I just wanted to do a master's. I wanted to continue my education. There was funding. There was always a pragmatic reason. Still at that point in time, it very much like just kind of just going. And I still am, I think. But yeah, as to what it is, contemporary modern European philosophy.
What are its characteristics? It's sort of opposed, usually, isn't it, to analytical philosophy? So what would you say its characteristics are, its key figures and so on, just to give people a little bit of a flavour?
Oh, blimey.
What did you like about it?
What I liked about it was that there seemed to be a use case. So the use case was more to do with, we're also going to be talking about film, we're also going to be talking about literature and art, and it's not analytic philosophy, which is at certain points math. There is an overlap between the two at certain points. The distinction, I mean, the battle for the distinction goes on and on. Um, I also at this point had started to realize I could be smart, that I could get smart, and a lot of continental philosophy is like smart ass philosophy, like Deleuze, right? You're reading it because you want to be. I'm the kind of person who reads Deleuze. Yeah, he sounds cool. You know, I understand Deleuze and I understand Heidegger. I mean, there was an element of that. Um, yeah, I mean, there wasn't too much forethought.
Tell me a bit about that, the awakening of that sense of intellectual potential.
Um, I think it's to do with honesty. I think it's to do with honesty. An old blogger, back when I started the Meta Nomad blog, some blogger that I was chatting to at the time, he said something to me that's still stuck with me, and it's still, in a sense, one of the guiding philosophies of the podcast. And he said, some of the things that you feel and think are just so blindingly obvious that you'd never even mention them, let alone write them down. They might be life-changing to other people. They might literally, something that you've just seen about the world and thought, well, yeah, everyone sees. And I mean, really, things that you've so obvious to you. And he was like, just write them down because that's what you've experienced the truth. And there's two reasons for that. One is the one I mentioned, that it could something that you feel is so obvious could genuinely overhaul someone's life. The other thing that can happen is there might be people out there that are holding so much anxiety because they're like, oh boy, I see the world this way. And just when you read someone who just writes something that you're like, oh, it's such a cathartic, lovely feeling to say, oh, I'm not alone feeling. And so that awakening of that was I'm just going to write down how I feel about the modern world. And what came of it was quite a few people at the time who said, "Oh, I've thought of this way about the world for quite a while, and thanks for writing it." Yeah, and that maybe you are smart. You don't need to overthink it.
What do you mean about that last sentence?
Um, that you don't need to you don't need to develop a system or a full philosophy, or you could just write down something that might be as simple as, do the people on the checkouts seem genuinely dead to you? And that might be enough to say, well, I'm glad someone else is seeing that. Something like, what are we doing? Why? I didn't, yeah. Has anyone else noticed this about the world? I think, yeah. I don't have too much more to say there.
Mm. So, of course, if you're doing a master's, then
Mm.
you're not only reading, you also got to write essays and
Yeah.
things like that. So, was that the beginning of writing for you in a sort of serious way?
I was trying or just writing various things on little blogs that you'll never find them now. They're all long since deleted. One thing I've stopped doing it now. I can't really do it anymore because money is dependent on it. But one thing I love to do up until about the age of 22 actually was build something up and then just delete it. Like after every year in art school, I'd throw everything I'd made into a skip. So none of this writing exists, is what I'm saying. But I was writing from about 16. I was writing short stories, and at one point I even wrote a book. So I'd been writing since I was about 16. Not very good.
Where do you think that urge came from? That's interesting thing to be doing, given what else you've said about that time in your life.
I don't like that. I don't like the because I've tried to tiptoe around this, but anything I give you on that, why did I do it, is a story. Why are you interviewing me? Why did you start your podcast? I just don't have an answer. That is as agential as why why do I like mint ice cream? Do you think people maybe feel that if we had an answer to why do we write, that we'd get somewhere with creativity?
Do you mean that if you don't have a why, you can't be creative? Or is that those two things are somehow linked? Is that what you're saying? Or asking me?
Yeah. 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 Are they linked?
I don't know, actually. I don't suppose, I mean, this could get very philosophical very quickly, but I don't think one necessarily needs to know, even if one has a why, I don't think one needs to know it.
Yeah, I don't have a, you can throw a story on it, I mean, a psychoanalyst would throw a story, right, that trying to process something, or it's the unconscious, but I don't have the closest I could get in terms of a story would be to show people how I perceive the world, in the hope that if people also perceive it this way, they they get that feeling of something shared, that they're a bit less alone. So in my short stories, there's an element of that there. I think that, do you also feel this? Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You've said I've seen you see elsewhere. When were you born, by the way?
When?
Yeah.
94.
94. Okay.
I know.
So, okay. I've seen you say elsewhere, and I don't know if this is around this time then in your life, that you've been on the spiritual search. You've opened your Hermitage school. We'll talk about that probably quite a bit later, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
But I've heard you say that you've been on the spiritual search for, to quote you here, nigh on 15 years, in and out of groups and institutions.
Uh-huh.
So would that be around these university years that started, or earlier or later? When does that come into?
So the nigh on, the number there, 15, is that I can most firmly place being interested in Alan Watts at 17. But there was some stuff before that. But what I mean by spiritual search, let's change that to the word seeking, right? I've been seeking since then. I didn't know it then. I didn't know it then. And I don't think most people know the start of their spiritual search or their seeking is seeking. That's what they're doing. But that is, since then, I've had an engagement in the same way that someone would engage with hobbies that, oh, at some point I got interested in trains. And then every weekend I go to, I don't know, a train thing that from that point on, I was then like, there's some question and I keep buying books and I keep reading these things. So it was 17. And, in fact, it was probably sooner. It was probably I would go so far as to go back to 13 because that's when I was questioning, like, hang on, like, this is all, it was more of a anarchic position at that point, like the world's stupid kind of thing. But I was pretty serious about it. And then, 17, I'm a God for a long time was a big one. I fell into new atheism as so many people did at that around that time. So yeah, seeking. That's 17, which is college. 16, 17.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so I wonder if you might plot a bit of that trajectory, the sorts of things you were looking at. Alan Watts, great place to start, or
I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, and I suppose which institutions and groups were you in and out of? I'm very curious about that.
Okay. So it begins with the sort of Christopher Hitchens idea that if only no one believed in God, right? This was at 15, everything would be fine. So there was some notion of like, I'm right, right? This is a big part of it. So it was new atheism and the idea that if everyone was somehow an atheist, that we'd go through to like the humanist Dawkins thing through to about 16, 17. And then, that doesn't go anywhere. So I start reading Alan Watts, and I don't think it was anything to do with enlightenment or anything. It was like, these are the books that people kind of read in this sphere that are a bit edgy when you're that age, bit edgy, a bit bigger questions. Let's call it that at that point in time. So it was Alan Watts, it was John Kabat-Zinn, and the kind of mindfulness culture around that. It was also a lot of Camus. It was also a fair bit of like we could call it counterculture British lit that had stemmed from my interest in. I was so enamored by Christopher Hitchens that I was reading like Martin Amis, right? I was like a 16-year-old reading Money by Martin Amis. Like, well, that doesn't even make sense. It's this book about 80s consumer, but there seemed to be something. So I was also reading a lot of, I would say, like edgy lit, so American Psycho and this kind of thing. And then go through to uni, it was just a lot more philosophy. It was getting a bit deeper into that kind of culture. So like J.G. Ballard, I was really into the films of Harmony Korine and this kind of culture. And the deeper I got into philosophy, so around the age of, it's a crazy thing. There was like 22 was also when I came across Nick Land. And it was around that time, I'd also, done a lot of meditations and some Robert Anton Wilson stuff before that, and a lot of chaos magic adjacent tidbits. And then for some reason off Nick Land, it was like, well, this guy seems somewhere along the line to be taking Crowley and Kenneth Grant and all this seriously. And then it got into magic. It just somehow fell into the occult. And then I was part of various online groups and reading groups. These, weren't necessarily institutional, but just getting into what that culture is like, learning those lessons. Then, the one I studied the longest was Franz Bardon, his whole system. That was like kind of Greer's advice of like pick a system, see it through. That was my one. That's why I always still refer to Bardon a lot when a lot of people don't. And I have this trait, by the way. I pick out the hard asses. I go straight to the hard ass. So, because after this, my first real, like, okay, I'm part of a group, this kind of group, was the Gurdjieff work. And I lucked out because I didn't have bad experiences there. Didn't have a leader. I didn't have a guru figure who was in any. It was like, this is just someone who's running the group. I really was very lucky there to not have any of that. But it did also teach me stuff about magical groups and what they're like, and calcification, and okay, this is and cliques and things like that. So then did the Gurdjieff work for a while, took that very, very seriously. Gurdjieff, of course, is like a, as even some people say, he's like, the patriarchal finishing school. Because you go through all this kind of chaos magic sigils, get what I want, I'm being a bit of a rebellious teenager. And there's a point, I mean, Alan Chapman talks about it a lot. I know you've had Alan on recently, but Alan Chapman talks about this a lot of like, there's this point in your spiritual search where you're like, well, I've kind of realized that I 90% of the time my sigils work or my magical things work and I get what I want. So that's an interesting moment because you go, well, I can cut you actually, I think if you're quite sensible at the moment, and I don't mean to sound like megalomaniac, I don't mean that I could draw a sigil and, pull down a mountain. That's not what I mean. But there is an understanding from that of like, oh, hang on, I can kind of get what I want. Then you get to the real and the only spiritual question. Wait a minute. What do I want? So that came a bit later. But then, so I go through the Gurdjieff work, and off the back of the Gurdjieff work, I do my foray in Catholicism, which lasts roughly 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. And then then I have the fallout from that, and then get back into Magick in a different approach, completely like form-wise, different approach. And then finally started this school. It's very, very condensed. And it just seems so much that you haven't really been learning all that much until a lot of time has passed. And a lot of time has passed. It's a long journey and a lot of reading and a series of productive failures. A series. It's so interesting because I knew you were going to ask me this. I did know of all the things he's going to ask me. He'll ask me this. And all I thought about was like, I was trying to just briefly meditate on what the word spiritual is, like what that means to me. And the image that comes to mind for me, and it is the burning thing, but the image that comes to mind for me, and it's really strange, is if you can imagine someone on scaffolding and they're on a little plinth and they're stood on it and they're giving their like soapbox talk. When I think of spirituality, I think about someone coming along and just kicking the scaffolding out and that person falling on the floor in pain. And you go, oh, that didn't work. Like that didn't hold. And then you maybe take something from that and you move on. But that's spirituality to me. Spirituality to me, because we're talking about my spiritual search, spirituality to me is I'm going to pour gasoline on this and I'm going to set it on fire. And if something survives, that's real. And I've become merciless, I would say, in doing that. As much as I can, and as merciless as I can be with that process, that's where I've got to.
I'm curious then about several of those layers, actually. How was it with the Bardon material? Could you say a bit more about what you got out of that and what it was like getting into that?
I was never a joiner. Well, I was a carpenter, but I was never a group joiner. I always had one foot. I mean, I literally was a joiner when I was a carpenter, by the way. I always had one foot out the door. And so I purposely looked for like, okay, this magic stuff kind of works. So it does work. There's something here. And I wanted to take it seriously. But also I would say I was socially savvy enough to have been when I was young. I think this lodged somewhere in my memory, to be honest. You'll know this, I think, as a Brit. It's just something you do as a Brit. Maybe not so much anymore, but when I was young, you end up at like steam rallies and fairs and fetes. And I think something lodged in my memory of there's always live action role play people around. I don't have anything against these people, but something stuck in my mind of like, okay, I'm just not gonna go to those groups. I'm not I'm not the kind of person who's going to go to a 10 group thing of pagans in a, that's not what I'm going to do. That's not my dip. That's not my bag. I'm not really into it for that, the social thing. And that just stuck in my mind of something that I just wouldn't, I knew I'd never do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to purposely search for, like, is there a manual out there? And I remember, there was a few that I think I'd lined up. It was like Donald, Donald Michael Craig, Modern Magic was one, and there was Israel Regardie's Year. I bought that one. I remember it was like there was something in it I didn't want to do because I was still a bit embarrassed at the time. And Bardon, the reason, so I got Bardon, I got the initiation into Hermetics, and what I liked about it was like released at the start. I remember because I read it through, and I remember thinking, okay, there's a bit of stuff I might need at the end, robes, and if you go like if you really went the distance. But I was like at the start, I was like, I don't need any. Like and I haven't really got to do anything too. I can do this all from the comfort of my home. And Bardon emphasized it as a system for the busy everyday man. And so I was like, yeah, this fits. And what I liked was like, yeah, you do the step and you get to a certain point where you're like, oh, yeah, I got that step, and you keep doing the next steps. And if you stick to it, I'm not some like bard. You go on the Bardon forums, people are like, I've been on step one for 4 years. I'm like, you're doing it wrong. Like it, I don't. It's over. You could do initiation into Hermetics if you were really serious about it in 1 to 2 years. Some Bardon people would be like, whoa, but I think people overthink things. My my big approach to magic is calm down. Like it's not going to end. Chill out. If you get it wrong, there's no such thing. You can go back. This is all a journey. So did that. Experienced that it was very, very powerful. Um, First sort of experience of what spirit contact really is there at that point did freak me out. And then I went back to it, but then yeah, yeah. So it was a thorough, grounded experience. And I think also with the Bardon work, just trying to think. There is some emphasis, but it's more on spiritual hygiene than banishment, early on at least. So I didn't get into that neurotic thing. And that's never really got hold of me. That's why I'm not too, I like Dion Fortune, but she needs to ease off. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
When I think of Franz Bardon, I think of, at least in the initial stages of that curriculum,
Hmm.
the developing of things like concentration power and focus power and things like that. How did you find that journey? Did you have already quite a bit of that going in, or was that something you had to build up?
I've never really struggled to have attention on something. I think there was maybe a point in time. So there is a point where you need discipline. Discomfort to a certain point is key. But one thing, one thing I think people need to learn is that, well, actually, a lot of the time, if you're continuously trying to meditate and you just can't for some reason try to do it, you're just banging your head against a wall, and you're telling yourself a story that you need to step back and again approach in a different way. So you do need discipline, but I know the point with the Bardon and having willpower and attention is that if you, after a certain point in time at least, because you do need some discipline, but if after a certain point in time you can't give something this sustained attention, maybe you're just not interested in it, and that's fine. But you might just really not be interested in it. If, oh, every time I get down to meditate, I'm thinking about playing the piano. Maybe you should go play the piano, right? Like it doesn't need to be that difficult. So I didn't struggle too much because I was interested. I was interested. I mean, I had my weak points. So I had full blown aphantasia when I started the Pardon work, and I've pretty much overcome that now. Like I do full blown journeying now, and it's fine. But when I first started, I was like, I visualize a pen. Like what? It's black. Yeah.
And What would you say? I'm not sure you like this question, and if that, judging by what you responded before, but that's all right. You can say you don't like it and dismantle the question by all means. Fine.
Okay.
What do you think? People I sometimes think get into magic for all kinds of reasons, and one of the ways of detecting those reasons is to see what sort of things they're drawn to, what sort of things excite them. One person's very excited by a result in the world. Other people are very excited by maybe a feeling or a sense of contact with something and so on. And then you can sort of deduce by that maybe that the person's more or less interested in this or that. So some people get into magic for power. Some people curiosity. Other people the vibe. All kind of reasons, I think. What would you say characterized your interest in magic during that time?
Well, it's funny. I interviewed Tommy Kelly. Do you know of Tommy Kelly?
Of course, yeah.
I interviewed Tommy Kelly just yesterday, and he joked and he said, someone whose life is going really well or is fine or is good, they don't just sit down one day and go, you know what? Everything's going great. I'm going to get into the occult, right? So there's something, right? There's some discontentment. But as for reasons people do, I never, once I'd got to about 17, I always had work and I always had the money I needed. So it wasn't money. I also I've never struggled with getting girlfriends or chatting to women. That's a big one for a lot of people who get into the occult. They jump to these glamour magic or certain forms of power, to be honest. I'm not sure it was power. I don't know what I would have. Power, maybe like in terms of the key ones, power is maybe the one that comes closest. I think there was an element of trickster. Like looking back, there's an element of like, I want to get one over on life. I want to, like, if this is true, I want to be able to, like, I just wanted to know what I don't even care. I think that's what all I could say. But I don't remember any explicit thing that I jumped to. Um, and then the deeper you go, the deeper the question of what am I doing? What do I really want? That's a sign of maturing magic or maturing involvement in magic.
Do you ever explore the Crowley stuff, perhaps through Nick Land or so? Did you ever try, for example, were you ever tempted by the Abramelin ritual to contact your holy guardian angel, that kind of thing?
I so read a lot of Crowley. I'm with Stephen Skinner, what he writes in his introduction to the new edition of Liber ABA, book 4. And Stephen Skinner basically says that he says that where Crowley went wrong is one, he has this almost Victorian scientist. This is going to be a science outlook. Doesn't do it for me. He also believes that Crowley, once he had the Book of the Law, that he just was like, right, this is everything, and I'll just focus on this. And that was Skinner considers that a misstep, and I think I'd agree with him that the Lima as a religion, it doesn't do it for me. Now, Crowley's stuff, I think it took me I think everyone I know who seriously read Crowley they've I mean this is like anecdotal, but they've all said, you're kind of always rereading him. When you read him when you're young, and when I say young, I mean 20s. I don't know if you can get that much from him. I'm not sure. Maybe that was just me, but I remember being like, okay, I can understand what he's saying about the wand and the structure that he's taken from the Golden Dawn. I can understand, but that thing of like, but what do I do? Like, what's all this for? Couldn't quite get that at that age, and I wonder if you do need a certain amount of life experience before you go, oh, okay, like it's a bigger picture, and the bigger picture is the true will and the HGA. I don't really know how I feel about true will because I wonder if the true will as an idea ends up falling a bit too close to something like fate or destiny. As for the Abramelin, I at a certain point had coming up, I was like, I could do this. I could kind of make my when I was just doing the podcast full time, I was like, I could make it work where I could do the Abramelin, and I live alone, and I started this diary for doing the Abramelin, and as it is said the in the Abramelin, that this right will kind of cut you off if you're not ready, and it just like fate, like it just something happened. I was like, oh yeah, I was going to do that, and it didn't. I'd even got quite a few of the bits and just didn't end up doing it. I also wonder now because Alan Chapman talks about the HGA in Baptist Head and about how he kind of did that in what, like a 3 day ritual that he quickly made up. He got his contact. Is it just overblown? Do we need to do all that? And I probably are on that side now. But I'm sure I'll feel differently about Crowley in another 10 years. But I, I'm not interested enough to get involved with Thelema.
How did you get into Catholicism? I mean, it's recent enough that there are still interviews out there from that period.
I know.
That, when you're sort of fresh into it.
I watched about 5 minutes of one of them, and I looked very unwell. Why did I do that? I could give you a story. There's lots of stories I could throw onto this. It's I think at the time I said there's various strange experiences with the occult, and I realized that something like evil exists, so I'd rather be with the good. I could say we live in a postmodern, chaotic world, and we're looking for a structure. And I got to the point where I'd burned through all these systems and done all this stuff, and something still wasn't quite working. So one jumps to like a bigger system that has all this that has always been there and is very structured and blah blah blah. Could you say I got memed by online culture and caught up? That's a definite possibility. I would maybe the story I'd go with now is that, and this is the big change. This is the big change that happened, I think, after Catholicism, after it fell out, which was that all of that seeking, the presumed seeking, unconscious, the very notion of seeking doesn't come first. The idea of an answer, the idea of a conclusion, the idea of an end comes first. And from that, you then begin to seek. Because if there's an end, I've got to find it. So I'm a seeker now. I'm seeking the end. And all of these things along the way had been a temporary conclusion. I'm doing the Bardon thing now, and I get to the end of that system, and I'm doing Alan Watts now, and then, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, this is the big one, quite literally, the big daddy conclusion, right? I've found my way home. And didn't work. It burned down the same as the rest, but I fell out the other side, fairly sick, as I mentioned elsewhere. I fell out the other side where sort of the very notion of that there's ever going to be an answer was kind of gone. It took a while to realize that, but there isn't one. There's not going to be an answer. There isn't any. And actually, the pressure of seeking has, and this sounds strange for someone who's just started magic school, and we can talk about the way I want to frame it differently. That pressure of seeking, like as if I don't get up tomorrow and read that next book and find this book's going to have the thing, please, like the pressure of that. It was only in retrospect can I see this, but it was like someone had finally turned that valve, and the pressure for seeking is gone. There isn't some anxiety around that. There is some book out there that had, like, it just went, it just dissipated. So I don't have the pressure of seeking anymore. The metaphor that I give, because this is where I'm kind of critical of the non-dual stuff, like post non-dual is more interesting to me because, even Ramana Maharshi still had to sit around in a nappy all day. Like he's still there. Like, let's not beat around the bush. Is that, imagine that at a certain point I'll just use myself because this is how it was. At a certain point when I was 17, someone said to me, James, there's a dish, as in food, there's a recipe, there's a meal out there that's going to answer it for you. And I'm like, shit, right? I better get eating, right? So I'm like eating all these different meals. And then I'm like, man, Italian cuisine, no, it's not Italian cuisine. So then I moved to, I don't know, Thai. I'm like, nah, it's not Thai. So then I just start eating from all these cuisines. And then I'm like, nah, none of them are working. Maybe I'll go back to British cuisine. And then that falls. And then what happened was like, one day I was like, these are just fucking meals. This is just food. This is just food. Why did I get it into the mind that any of these were ever going to change anything? However, the reason I use meals as the example is I'm not going to stop eating. So I still have preferences for what I'm going to eat. But there is no feeling in me after that fallout that any of these meals is going to be anything more than a delicious dish to be experienced and savored and sensed for while it's there. And then, but you're always going to have to, you're always going to have to eat. You're always going to have to exist. Does that make sense?
Yes, I follow the metaphor.
Okay.
Did this come upon you in a kind of epiphany, sudden epiphany, or was it a gradual realization, this shift that you're describing here?
I mean, there was a big openness at the end, and it wasn't a nice one. Because I remember the last few times leaving church, I was sick to my stomach. And I mean that literally, when I'd left, I'd be like the knot would release. I shouldn't be there. It's not right. Um, and then I had this moment with, gonna, I'm just wondering whether or not, I had a moment where someone called me out on my misery because I'd sort of fallen back to my pessimism and misery. Like it was a pretty deep depression. It was a very new. It's very new. Like I hadn't been that low before, and someone called me out at just the perfect time on my misery, and so much of my suffering went away in like one hit. And after the call with them, I was walking around, just everything was beautiful, and for like 2 weeks, for 2 weeks, um, everything was kind of overwhelmingly beautiful. And then the self, in its desire to, the only way it can exist is cling to whatever's experience. It has to make it about you and tell a story about it. And so it's like, oh yeah, I am so happy, blah blah blah. And then that scene wave went right down. And then when the scene wave finally came back up, because it was this huge high, and then it identified with the high, which meant, well, you have to come right back down. And then, but as this kind of final, because I haven't been depressed in that way since. This final like low, the only way I can describe it was so low that it just got strange. Like it was low beyond low. Like, how am I this low? And eventually that scene wave came up to the middle and the whole thing dissipated. And that's kind of how I've been for quite a while now, whatever that means. So I want to sort of draw a line at this point because I'm happy to tell you about everything I've just told you about, but it's all a story. I want to like caveat that now. It's all a story. I know that's the thing they say as well, but everything I've said so far is kind of like, well, this is it doesn't have any connection to any of this. None of that meant it didn't mean anything at all. But I like stories. So I'm fine to give you the story. But this is the line where I'm like, now can we talk properly? And get away from James.
Say more about that. What do you mean by that, to talk properly?
There you go. That was talking properly. That was nice. Talking properly is the quickest definition is when the conversation isn't seeking to prove or convince or judge or doesn't have a direction. It just is. Might not be too interesting for listeners. Your headphones haven't broken.
It seems like this is an important point that
Which
you're
point?
making, this that you're making here, this line you've drawn,
Mm.
and this idea of talking properly, as opposed to telling stories.
Yeah. Well, I think it's key to draw the line because one is a case of imitation. Not that people were going to try and imitate me, but there's nothing there to be imitated. There wasn't really anyone. There wasn't really anyone there. I don't. Um, Not really. It's difficult to see. Some phases you maybe say. I don't know. My memory is very flat now. It doesn't. Yeah. So so to draw that line and to say all of that, whatever that was a story. The pressure that I spoke about that went away. It'd be very easy if someone still has that pressure, and I can still relate to that pressure. It'd be very easy to relate that pressure to a story. That's what that pressure is all about, stories. And so I want to say that's a story because it's all just stories. Everyone's just telling the self is just the self telling itself a story recursively. It's a knot pulled in space by its own story, but actually nothing's pulling it but itself. It's telling its own story. And there's nothing in that story that would lead to that dissipate. There's nothing there. But I still, as that's why I use the meal example, because I just feel that non-dualists go too far, is that what's wrong with stories? So I don't have a problem with biography and thing, you know. Yeah.
But you've asked that we talk properly. You see, let's start talking properly. So that's what I'm trying to understand, I suppose, is what you mean by that. And the story part I understand, biography and that sort of thing. What's the talking properly part?
Hmm. Well, it's just this. It's just this. I mean, when you talk normally, or you talk regularly, almost always about the past. Pretty much entirely. Even when you talk about the future, you talk about the past. Because in talking about the future, you visualize something that has happened in the future. So it's already happened. So, you know, there's, I think talking properly is a paradox because you've got to talk about the unknown. Otherwise, it's just past. And it doesn't exist. I'm about to just reel off every platitude of spiritual seeking. We can continue to talk non-properly. if you like. Story. We can continue to keep talking story.
If we didn't, what would it look like? What would we be doing?
Well, whatever arises. Did you notice that when we finished talking about my story, that the subtle nervous energy we both had in our chests just is gone now? We had this breath thing at the start, and it was an excited, almost nervous energy. And now the story's expelled itself. There's nothing needs to be proven.
Well, seeing as you involve my chest in the matter,
Okay.
um, I I can certainly respect and what you're saying
Mm.
and understand what you're saying. I didn't. That wasn't my experience.
Okay.
But I wouldn't necessarily bring that up. But seeing as you brought my chest into the matter, um, but you know, we're at this point of you've described this opening that's come. You've gone to high, you've gone to the low, and then you've come to this sort of opening. And it's from that, or at least immediately after that, chronologically in our conversation, that you drew this line. You started speaking in a very different sort of a way, and very emphatically so.
Mm.
And so it seems to me very important, this mode, and that's why I'm trying to give it some space and also trying to draw out a little bit more about that. Maybe even participate in it, in that sort of proper talking with you. It seems very important.
It's all there is. It's all there is. I mean, it's contentment, it's energy, it's what there is. Um, and I think openness is a good term. Openness is an allowing. I mean, these are all it allows things to move. And the journey up until that point had been various places of knots of, a little bit of movement, it tightens up, a little bit of movement, tightens up. And when it comes to magic, when it comes to magical experiencing, I mean, there's various mystics who've written about this in various different ways, but put simply, if the container is full, nothing new can flow through it. And so when it comes to magic and experiencing the world magically, if you haven't burned as much as you can out first, then nothing new is going to arise. You're kind of bashing your head against a wall. But once that has happened, there's just space for kind of anything and everything to happen. Um, whether it's seemingly spontaneous or almost like nonchalant, but there's space for whatever to appear. And I think we could think about that as what was filling the space before was ideas and preconceptions and presumptions and assumptions about how reality is, or even the idea of reality altogether was in there. And as that's all burned away, or as much as you can, in this continual burning, that I'm not quite sure it ends. I'm not quite sure where I stand on the idea of enlightenment. But that space, that opening that's allowed, I mean, life is constant change, it's constant movement. And that seems to be saying that anything that is false is stopped, is stuck, is stasis. And the purest way to be then would be nothing, because then you're completely open. And if you're completely open, whatever that means, then magic just kind of works. Like nothing, there is no surprise in what might appear. You're no longer really caught up in results even. Yeah.
What's the experience of going about one's daily business and doing things, from that point of view or in that state or of mind that you're talking about, this openness and letting things be as they are and so on? What's it like to go about regular things that, I might say to myself, I want a cup of tea, I make a cup of tea, etc., stories and so on. What's it like from your point of view?
About the same. I get up, make a coffee. Um, but I'm not saying I'm anything. I'm not really saying I'm in any state. I get where that would come from. I do. And I also understand the frustration of, well, what am I talking about? And I don't want to put a name on this at all. I'm not saying I'm enlightened or awakened, or I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying I'm anything special at all. Um, but you know what I could say is that seeing things as the story that they are, the story that's being told. That's really maybe the only difference. And what that allows is function versus ideation. And ideating on how, but, should, if, could, all ideational words, their inherent pressure and tension against reality. This should be this way is an immediate holding of falsity because it isn't. And so if you just purely functional and burn away the ideation, then there isn't going to be places for tension to build. Does that make sense?
Well, I find it very, very interesting.
Okay.
For the record, I don't find it frustrating.
Okay.
But I find it very interesting.
You don't find what frustrating?
Oh, you mentioned before you understand that it can be frustrating.
I think I was speaking to the audience because I do genuinely understand the frustration where someone's like, I can't. You ask me what my state's like, and I don't have anything. I can't point to anything. That can be frustrating. That can be to someone. Yeah. So what was you find interesting?
Well, like I said before, it was such a marked shift in your way of speaking when you drew that line. It seemed to me, and seems to me, worth honouring that.
How do you feel about that shift?
Well, I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I mean, I'm interviewing you.
Yeah.
And for you to do that, I think seems to me to be expressing something very profound in your experience. And something that's quite important. Otherwise, why would you have brought it up in such a sort of way like that? So my reaction to it, I suppose, is like, well, I've said it a couple, 2, 3 times now. Interest.
Okay.
And wanting to give that space and for that to unpack a bit more. I don't necessarily assume to understand exactly firsthand what you're talking about. Of course, the idea of going beyond stories, the idea of the self reinforcing itself by self-referencing, that sort of loop, of course, is, I think, a familiar idea.
Yeah.
But your insight and your way of putting it, and your experience, I find, I find intriguing. So, I mean, I'm saying the same thing again and again here, but I certainly welcome it. Welcome that change of pace. That change. I mean, I've got lots of other story questions too, by the way. But that's not. But that's all right. This is also cool. This is also cool.
We can flip between. What I'd say is the the deep understanding that it's all stories. But there's nothing wrong with stories. Stories are great. But you are just telling yourself a story about how things are or should be, or it's all labels, right? Um, you know, I mean, yeah. I mean, let's go back. I mean, I'm fine with the story questions.
Well, maybe I'll ask some more story
Okay.
questions. And if you want to answer them in the story way, you can. Or you can take this perspective and cut through the story. Whatever seems good from your side. So I'm really quite curious about the transition out of Catholicism.
Hmm.
2.5 years in Catholicism. You said 2.5, 3 years out of, and
Yeah.
maybe there's a bit of meme. You got memed. You said that. I thought that was very interesting
Yeah.
indeed, because there is a big meme at the moment,
There
isn't
is.
there, about
Yeah.
going back to traditional religion, finding something there, participating in,
Yeah.
Orthodox. I think Orthodox Christianity is sort of
Not
the number
just
one cool one. And
yeah.
yeah.
As far as I'm concerned as well, it's not just Christianity.
Oh, really? Go on.
Yeah. Well, I just heard that various young people are doing the same thing that you're saying. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's quite a big worldview shift, I would imagine, entering Catholicism and doing it with the sort of intensity that I imagine you would have done, and then to leave that and to come out of that. What sort of shifts and changes were going on there, and what was that deconversion like?
It's interesting the way you frame it, actually, that you say that must have been quite a worldview shift. Because outside of a fairly just dogmatic approach to morality, actually, in retrospect, it wasn't. Here's just some things you can't do anymore and have to find ways to not do them. But other than that, it's a very productive way to put it, actually. Looking back, I just want to sort of dwell on that a little bit. It must have been, so you said it must have been a fundamental worldview shift. Maybe that was the disappointment that it wasn't. Because, as I said, there is now, so much Christianity is just morality. And when we think of Christianity, we just think of that's the thing where people don't do X, Y, Z. They have to get no sex before marriage and various thou shalt nots, and it's all about morality. And our interaction with Christianity is predominantly moralistic because we primarily hear about Christianity through light politicization of Christianity through the news, like this fundamentalist group is saying this. So it's all what we see is all morality. And I think maybe I thought, well, when I get involved, or unconsciously this is, I thought, well, maybe when I get involved, there is going to be this, as you say, like some sufficient change where there's something in there that means you can keep going with it. And I went through the steps, so I sort of self-discerned for a while, and that was my own reading, which I probably shouldn't have done it that long because if you're doing your own reading, you're basically constructing your own idea. And I was reading everything, and I was reading theology, and really, I was reading the Catechism. And it turns out when you actually get involved and go through the RCIA, it's nothing. It's all kind of pastoral and communal, and actually, it's just about. I don't even know what it's about. I don't even know what it's about. So maybe you've actually put your finger on something there that it wasn't a worldview shift. There wasn't a qualitative shift. It was like these quantified things that had to change on top of the world that was already there. And that's not enough. But as for what fell away, what I say to people is it just didn't, there's nothing there. So I'd experienced spiritual stuff. I'd experienced use put sacred placeholder in here. I'd experienced something like the divine or that before. And the sort of tragedy that there's nothing in the church, literally, is really gut wrenching. There's nothing there. Your question was about. leaving about the deconversion.
Yeah, and joining, leaving, the whole thing.
It already feels just so distant. Um, Leaving was difficult. Leaving would just felt like so. Leaving felt, and I'm fine to say this because I do feel more and more. This is going to happen to more and more people in coming years as they maybe have to dwell on the same questions of this. This does work as a certain thing, but it might not. But it can only work if the core is there, and the core is a certain type of faith or spirituality that isn't there anymore and isn't being maintained. And that just fell away, and it was pretty horrible. I do remember that sort of because you really were in this thing, and then very slowly, and then sort of all at once, you know, 1 week of a month I didn't go to mass, and then it's like every other week, and then next thing you know, you're like, I just haven't been, and that being in that place isn't nice because you that was a real all out of options moment for me. Um, yeah, and yeah, it just didn't work. Wasn't anything there. I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to answer more.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very powerful what you've said there. Did you engage in any kind of spiritual formation or mentoring whilst you're in the Catholic Church?
Yeah. Yeah, I went full. I went so hard. I was going to mass. I was going to mass twice a week. So before anyone says, well, maybe you just didn't, I was going to mass twice a week, which where I am in Norfolk is a feat in itself, to be quite honest. And then Bible study once a week, and then reading theology and the catechism at home, and then you have to sort of post RCIA catch up with your priest, and then I started doing secular Carmelites, um, and then but it just, and I'm sure someone will probably say, well, you did too much. So I certainly tried, and did everything by the book. But just the spiritual side never came through, and eventually you get through to these very basic questions of like, which I don't have an answer to, by the way, of do you believe Jesus Christ was the Son of God? And my answer is I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that means. I do not know what that means. And that was the conclusion. It's kind of like, I don't want to use the word, I don't want to use the word Lovecraftian, but it kind of fits. It's like looking at something, and at a certain point, you know this is a pair of glasses, and then 1 month to the next, I don't know what that is. I don't know what on earth you're on about, actually. And then you're sat in a room with people doing this thing that I don't want to project onto them, by the way. I'm sure they believe. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure they do. I'm trying to be nice. I don't. I have no idea what was going on, even. And at that point, what do you do? What can you do? Well, pray.
Did you share this with anyone within the church at that time? And if so, what did they say to you about it?
I did try, but one of the realizations is that the majority of Catholics are cradle Catholics, and converts don't really last very long. And actually, I wonder if there's something to be said for if it's been in your family, you've got this real deep thing. And the conversations of doubt aren't really the same between cradle and convert. The kind of things that I was interested in Catholicism, theology, yeah, just it. I tried. I did try with priests, but it just sort of shuts down. And I mean, who knows why? I mean, is it because when you're actually confronted with someone who's having a serious doubt that I don't know. But that's not to say like I'm not going to bemoan it because actually Catholic Church isn't very it doesn't really proselytize. So it's not really. If you go to Protestant church, they'll be like, "Come on in." You go to Catholic church, you can sit at the back and leave before anyone even speaks to you. It's actually a sort of selling point. Um, they're not really in their own way. They're not proactive about emailing you. James, how is it going? I mean, enough time had passed where it's like, you're on your own, and it didn't work out. And I do feel, I will say this now, I do feel there might be a small wave, and I'm not just saying this because it happened to me. I feel there will be a small wave of deconvert lost, like being lost. If they were earnest in that, and it wasn't, I say I got memed. I was earnest about it at the time, but I feel that there's a coming wave of like, what happened? What was that? Like, what did I get pulled into? And that doesn't mean you weren't honest as much as you could be at the time. But that's coming, and I don't know how many people are going to talk about it. And I'm fine to. I'm fine to say it. I'm fine to say that part of the journey absolutely failed for me, and I don't. I had, and I have. I don't have answers from it, but it would be easy to not talk about it.
Yeah, that's very, very good. I do agree that there must surely be a wave of that coming. Because people
I
are.
don't know about the Orthodox.
Oh, I think it's going to be just the same.
Yeah.
It's exoticism, which is, of course, on the one hand, its otherness makes it accessible because it carries less baggage, cultural baggage, and so on, that one is familiar with. But that doesn't mean it's got less of it. So I think it's unlikely to be much different in what you're describing.
Mm.
And, that really, I mean, that's an interesting question, I suppose, sociologically or civilizationally, these sorts of questions. So, what happens to that group?
Yeah. There's something to be said there for whether or not it really was the. Some people might be able to argue that whether was it the religion, because at a certain point, once something has become so, and that's not me trying to get out of it, but at a certain point, once something's been so subsumed into social and especially political dynamics. So one thing about people joining the Catholic Church that I feel maybe is, if we were to again put a story on it, is that I think a lot of young men especially, and it doesn't have to be the Catholic Church, institutional religion, what they seem to be doing is putting the cart before the horse. So they see order, structure, families, marriages. They see like a life in a world where a lot of people don't seem to be able to like get all those elements together, and they're sort of putting the cart before the horse in the sense of like, I'll join that thing that has those, and that will happen in some way. But what that usually means is you just end up on your own in the thing. There's a lot of yeah, yeah.
You mentioned before something that right at the very beginning, that you've come to accept that you're a modern man.
Yeah.
And you said, you wrote, of course, Exiting Modernity and so on. You've come to accept you're a modern man. And I wonder if that has something to do with it, that you can't go back. You can't get there from here, that sort of thing. And that this attempt to go back is not going to work. Perhaps that's not the right way to think of it. I'm sort of implying maybe that there's a development, and I don't mean to imply that. And I certainly don't mean to imply hierarchy, that somehow, religious idea gives way to something like modernity, and that's somehow more advanced or better. I'm not trying to say that. But on the other hand, I suppose back is a metaphor really in this case, rather than a value judgment. But I wonder about that. When did you come to accept that you're a modern man? Does that have any bearing on what we've been saying?
It would have been around the time. So around the carpentry time, I think I would have had some acceptance of it on a functional level. Because I remember I was reading Heidegger at the time for I can't remember why, but Heidegger has this real sort of fetishism for craft and wood carpentry and using tools, and I remember stood there covered head to toe in sawdust, and I remember thinking, no, I love the belt sander because otherwise this would have just been a painful job. And you could say, well, the fact I have to sand it down and is to do with capitalism or something like that. But the point really around that was like, look, you're in the time you're of and in the time that you are. It's healthier to not shy away from that. And I tried to shy away from it. So many different. That doesn't mean that I go buy Funko Pops and watch every new rubbish thing or engage almost like completely sympathetically. It doesn't mean that at all. But there's a form within us that we can't get away from, and trying to get away from it is a friction that again it's like a build of tension where you're not going to win. You're just not going to win. Now, I wonder if it is particularly painful for many people because we do seem to be at the end of a cycle. So it's not like we're close enough to a time of tradition that we can go talk to a grandparent and go, oh, like I can kind of get a bit of a feeling for tradition. We're not that close anymore. We're also clearly not close enough. It feels this way. So this is completely unfalsifiable, but it also feels like we're also not close to whatever we know we've got a few decades ahead before whatever the new thing is solidifies. And we it seems, I think, for so many people that not only are we in a limbo, we are knowingly in a limbo, but that is the time we've got. And so we're in this kind of time of uncertainty. Now, whether or not, pre-agricultural tribes, I mean, did they ever think, oh, like what was their uncertainty? I mean, I don't really have answers. Or when we had long periods of, say, feudal lord relationships and subsistence farming or whatever it might be, where there wasn't really the changes that we see. Did they have what was there? Did they have this feeling of uncertainty? Again, I don't know. So I don't want to say we're the only people that's ever been uncertain. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But we just really want a story. We really want a story. And it always feels like the next story is too far away and the last story is too far away that way. And we can't quite hold on to them enough. And we're just far enough away from the stories that it does seem a bit ridiculous when someone's in one,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're putting a finger on what I was driving at there.
With the Orthodox thing?
No, with my question that
okay.
You can't put the cat back in the bag. And once the horse is bolted...
We can't go back.
Yeah. Spengler would say it's if we're in a winter...
The winter, yeah.
Yeah, then we're children of winter. We can't pretend otherwise.
And there's exactly. But there's nothing wrong with that. What's the healthy thing to do for someone who's dying is hold their hand. It's not to try ram adrenaline in. Like you have to stay because winter is the end of a season. It's the end of a natural cycle. That plant blossomed. It's now withering and it's going to go back into the soil. And that soil is going to grow something again. Yep, you happen to be born at that part of the cycle. What is the most productive or beneficial way to actually approach that? And if it's a plant, you say, I remember when that plant was nice. But, when that's your whole life cycle, it's a bit of a different thing. But the hospice care for the planet or for whatever this is that's dying. But that's a projection that dying's bad, right, isn't it? Because we never want things to end or change. We want permanent happiness right now all the time.
Speaking of stories, of course, if we think about winters, civilizational winters and so on, and where do we get that idea from? Internet? Probably. Books? Maybe. Probably internet. I mean, this is a narrative that's out there. It's an idea. I'm sympathetic to the idea, but it's certainly an idea that's out there. And something that can happen, speaking of stories, is that one can become somewhat co-opted by that story. Is your life a winter? In your little mini sphere, your centre amongst them?
You mean?
I don't mean you. I was sort of I was being a bit rhetorical, really.
Is my life a winter?
Well, if one feels like one's living in the winter of civilization, maybe one is. Let's just take that idea. And we're a child of winter and all this sort of thing. Well, does it feel that cold? or is it because
You still blossom.
YouTube's telling you it's the winter, and
No, no, no.
people are,
That's the grand cycle. I mean, we still grow and have our. I'm blossoming. Yeah.
let's
No,
talk.
no.
Go on.
Sorry. You go on. No, go ahead.
Well, I'd rather you finish your thought actually.
I can't remember where it's gone now.
Okay, then in that case, let's talk about that blossoming. um, so you come out of Catholicism, and this is sort of leading up to Hermitage now, right? And you re-engage with magic, but you said a different approach, different way somehow you re-engage.
I don't have the pressure for an answer. So before, when I was doing magic, it was part of that big long journey of like, there's going to be a thing. There's going to be a thing that, done. And I just continue doing that till the day I die. Seeking. There's pressure of seeking, the tension of seeking. And I don't have that I don't have that anymore. But I still love magic. It's still a preference. Yeah.
So what happens to that energy of seeking for you? Has it transmuted into this sort of creativity, starting the Hermitage, sharing with others and so on? I mean, it seems like you've been doing that all along, in a sense, to some degree anyway, sharing with others. But is that what's happened? Do you think this has come out of the death of seeking? Bit of a leading question, I'm afraid.
It is a leading question. I'm going to agree with you. I think so. Certainly feels right. Yeah.
Well, seeing as we're talking about the Hermitage now, you said that there was a way that you're going to present things and frame things, and there's a particular way you want to do it with the Hermitage.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you might just say something about the Hermitage in general, what it's about. It's full of video courses, and I have not been in there myself, but video courses, and it's going to be added to and so on. There's a lot of material in there already, it seems.
Yeah.
So what is it all about, and what's this way of doing it that you're keen to do?
Okay. So the Hermitage is going into marketing story. The Hermitage is an online magical school and community. The courses there's about 10 courses. So there's ancestor worship, sigil magic, chaos magic, 2 courses on the tarot, a course on journeying, course on esoteric Christianity that I did with Aaron French. There's a basic course on like kind of intro to spells. There's a foundations of magic course, which is really the course where I talk about my approach. So those are, I'm probably even forgetting one of the courses there. And I plan to do astrology and other things down the line. But there's enough to last you a year if you were to be on there like every day at the moment, right? There's a lot of stuff. And I like being transparent about things. So it is subscription. It is £20 or $25 a month. Now, my approach actually it's a question that I've thrown into our conversation a few times, and I just think it's like the question to do all of your magic and all of this around, which is what do you want? Because there's no wrong answer to that, and I think the most beautiful answer is I don't know, but something keeps pulling you to this. And I don't even mean magic. Like magic is much broader. I don't like the word magic. I don't like the word spiritual. But like whatever this is of like imbuing and opening, right? So that's really my approach. Is like I'm not here to say, right, this is a left-hand path school, or this is a Golden Dawn adjacent school, and you should do it like this. I'm I'm saying courses and no curriculum, and all the body energy and vitality is the other course. So we go through like Wilhelm Reich and energy stuff, and all the courses sort of have a foot in the other. If you wanted to say, oh, I finished that course, actually that connects up. But the point is, it's kind of like, look, here's the terrain. And what seeds you then plant and what grows, that's your domain. I'm not here because Golden Dawn would be like, you only plant this seed and this is what's meant to grow. And then after that, you plant this seed, this grows. Fine, I have nothing against those, and you could fit that in. But for me, it's more about the magical terrain. So it's more about the emphasis I make is that there is no separate spiritual life. We often hear about this, like, are you a spiritual person? As if, well, on Saturday and Sunday, for a couple of hours, I go be spiritual. Like for me, I will really want to emphasize that there's no split. So your life is either imbued with this mystery and this wonder, and what a lot of the courses are really trying to aim towards and gesture towards is just ways to basically, let's say, overturn the soil in your terrain to imbue your life with that, rather than here's the path. Like I don't. So that's the function of it. That's the non-trajectory of it. It's what you do in magic is going to be completely yours. And there's so much talk in magic of the right way and the wrong way, and you have to do this meditation, and you're getting tantra wrong, or and it's like I really emphasize just so much, like off the back of losing that. You are right, actually, of why this came about. Off the back of losing that pressure, that for an answer is, that amazing course somewhere that someone told you about. When you get to the end of that, you think you're going to be done. Well, like, what does that mean? Oh, because when people say you need to do this meditation, there's hidden in that is this implicit, if you do this meditation, you get to X. That's why you need to do it. So the answer's already there. Like, no, there isn't any answers. Like, it's the same as the question, what are you going to do with enlightenment? If you agree with enlightenment, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? You're going to stop living? You're going to keel over and, oh, I'm enlightened, I die? Or what do you think that's going to be? You still got to keep going. So the non-point or terrain point is that it's about just engagement and interest and imbuing your life with mystery. And it's not like, right, I get journeying now. Now I move on to, it's not to do with credentials. It's not to do with answers. There's no completion. There really isn't. It's a tough sell because you're not going to get a certificate. Sorry to say. Yeah, but that's the Hermitage.
And how's the reception been so far? I mean, it's not even been live a month, has it? I think it's really quite new. Yeah,
it's really new. It's been a really good reception. There's already a growing community in there. Everyone's very, very friendly, and the feedback I've got is that the talks that I give there give that impression. So it seems that has been put across. Like that's what it's for. And the way I've spoken about it in the places I've spoken about it is, as this living magical communities, I do think the community side's kind of almost more important, like than you can get these kind of a lot of these ideas. Anyway, you can learn the tarot 100 different ways. What I really wanted to emphasize was like, I want a place, and I've always wanted a place where someone could say, I did this meditation yesterday and there's energy running up my left leg, and no one, there's no boundaries. And someone else is in there saying, I did this, I did this contemplation exercise and I had dreamt of Eros last night. What do you guys think? I just wanted somewhere where anyone could say that without hesitation and without any reservation. And that also, like, maybe we won't have an answer, but actually we're just kind of painting, like we're just living. But we're people who are open to this stuff. So basically a very open, accessible community where you could just talk about this stuff. Yeah.
It's great. Very cool. This has been so cool, James. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. That's the story I'm going to tell myself anyway. Stories. No, I have enjoyed it very much, actually. A couple of if you want, quick fire mop up questions from what we've said.
Okay.
One of them is you mentioned you had some experiences before you joined the Catholic Church with magic that gave you a sense of that might be evil out there, so that's you mentioned as part of it. I'm curious what those experiences were, and also where you're at with them now. How you position how you see evil, if you want, now from this new place.
That's a quick fire. Quick fire.
It's quick to say it.
Quick fire. What's evil? Um, that's that. It's so difficult because on the one hand, what the first thing that one wants to jump to is that there are undoubtedly these experiences that you see, and you if you saw them, you would desire to stop them, and that's where you'd say, look, there's that which we would call evil happening. But I do wonder at this juncture, like every everything is in some sense one, and everything is in some sense energy. That's my understanding. And to the extent that these are different energies, and to the extent that there is some understanding that you could, if you pick up a stick, you have to pick it up. You can never just have one end. Um, and whatever the great play of all of this is, it includes that. And one's alignment with that is a different question, I think. What you want to align with, whether or not you can gel with it, even because it's interesting that there are entities, for instance, that one would put on the evil side of things that have an energy that I wouldn't want to go near, or that I would actually, let me rephrase that just doesn't gel with this. That, but then there's other people who seem to be able to gel with it, and it's actually very productive for them, and they've found it cathartic, and they haven't gone off and done super evil things with it, right? They've actually found some entity that's continually projected collectively to usually be cruel. They've worked with them in such a way that it's productive for them, and that seems to be some strange flow of energy. I'm not trying to avoid your question, but it's a really difficult one. Like, where do I stand with? There seems to be something like differences in energy, and one can gel or align with one or the other. That's about as far as I'd go, because I can't say any more from experience. But the experiences beforehand were the typical ways in which that energy presents itself, like suffocative feeling of like something's here that actually doesn't is really not friendly. It really is not, and that those. I don't know if you've ever had anything like that yourself, but it's very difficult to articulate what that feeling is like. Actually, I'll give the example I give in the course, because people are always interested about. People are quite fearful, I think, of invoking spirits for the first time, even if it's ones where it's like, look, generally we know this one's friendly and helpful. Here's how you do it. And the way I actually explain it is the same experience that the majority of people have had, except that experience can sometimes be different. So it's actually like the bus meme, right? Like a heaven and a hell. The same experience could be heaven or hell. And the experience is, and this is somewhere close, I think, to the evil experience, strangely. When you were young and you'd go to the cinema, but you'd go in the day. So you'd go to the cinema in the daytime, and then you go through usually down the big cinema corridor. And then you pick your screen. You go through one door, then another corridor, then another door, and then you're in the dark domain of the cinema, right? And if you're in the day, the reason I emphasize the day is you're sort of then in this other world, basically darkened world for 2 hours, watching something that goes through night and day usually, right? So basically you're put in another realm for a bit. Now I kind of invite people to remember that feeling when you leave the cinema and you sort of open the door quite starkly into this often destabilizing feeling of like, ooh, I kind of completely forgot who and where and what I was. And often that corridor that you end up in feels like it's like moving and swaying. And that feeling of that atmosphere, sometimes that can be liberating. Like you've like, ooh, it opens up into this kind of liminal strangeness. Like you've moved in time. But sometimes it can be really like almost nauseating. And for me, I'm like, that's how I describe spirit contact, is that feeling. And good and evil is something to do with those feelings of energy for me. And one of them is very like, I'm here to drain you. And the other one is I'm here to build you up. Does that resonate with you at all, out of interest?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Was that an invocation that led to that? You invoked some sort of negative entity and...
Yeah, I mean, well, I was completely ignorant and stupid, and actually, I think it's one of those points early on where I'd done a fair amount. I'd done these kind of small. Sorry, are you good for time?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd done. It was a point where in my magic where I'd done, and I know quite a few people have also done this, but I'll keep it to myself. Like I don't want to do the whole. It's fine because other people have done it. It was a point where I'd done quite a few bits of magic, and that feeling of this all seems to work, and it seems to work 95% of the time. So then you go, you know what? I'm gonna like. I've been firing off a pistol, and I'm now going to fire a bazooka to just really solidify it. And I did. I summoned an entity. I think I did it a few times, which was really stupid. Different entities, but it did solidify something for me. But yeah, I did, and it was just very overwhelming. It was really overwhelming, and um, yeah,
Was it sort of Goetia sort of thing?
yeah, yeah. And the first, it's strange what goes through your mind at the moment when it arrives. Is This was my first proper summoning, and the first thing that went through my mind as this presence, very difficult to describe what it's like, entered the room and then began kind of like suffocating me. First thing that went through my mind was, I think I voided my rental contract. But really strangely, a line from my rental contract went through my mind that said, "You will not do anything immoral in the house." It's in my previous place, and I was like, "Bugger." So that was what went through my mind was that some bit of bureaucracy. Yeah.
When you did that working, did you use all the usual protections and so on and methods?
No.
You just sort of evoked it freestyle, so to speak, freestanding.
And I'm fairly critical of banishment and I go do it if you want, but I don't know. Like I don't really believe in curses. I don't. I that like they just things you do in your. It's a whole neurotic side of magic that I just. As soon as someone, I mean, there's no need to go into this. I just it's an area of magic, very Dion Fortune, fairly neurotic. I'll put it this way. The fourth talk in my foundations course on the school is called Mental Health in the Right Frame. And I start that talk by saying, this might seem strange for a magic school, but there are a lot of times when you shouldn't be doing magic. And that magic is a frame, psychology is a frame, mundane living is a frame. And the problem with magic is that when people get into it, it overtakes all frames. And everything can have a magic or spiritual solution. And actually, you need to stop, you need to get good sleep, you need to eat good food, and you need to go walk every day for a month, then come back. Or you need to see a therapist for a bit. You need to be in the psychology frame for a bit. Yeah. And a lot of that form of when people are getting near, curses or I've been something's on me, I would usually err towards you just need to calm down. You need to relax and take some time out.
How did you exit those situations? You describe that suffocating evil presence and so on, without falling into one of these, without trying to do some banishing or protection or so.
I got my breath and sort of said thank you to it, and then just sat where I was for a bit and sort of brought myself down, blew out the candles, and then I just opened the window and lit some incense. I don't, yeah, yeah, that was it. That was it. I mean, some people would say that's banishing for what it's worth. Um, my experience has been that a lot of people don't have great spiritual hygiene. Um, and if you're on top of that, I don't know to what degree banishing is as much of a worry. But I am also sympathetic to the ideas of Stuart Wilde, who's someone I've very recently got into, but I'm very, very hot on his approach. But he talks about, well, if you're going into the astral plane and you want to deal with some big horrible thing, or I don't know, confront something, and you've done the whole like sphere of light around you. He makes this point of like, well, isn't that projecting that actually you're really insecure? And like, what good's this little bubble of light going to be against Baal or whatever, right? So it's, again, it's kind of the direction of the school is more about building up that inner you rather than constant need for trinkets and additions. And I'm not very ceremonial, to be honest. Um, yeah, I like incense and candles, but I don't do the dagger or can't get rid of chaos magic that easily.
Yeah, I hope you're right
What do you mean? What about what?
about that perspective.
Oh, what? Not needing banishing?
Stuff like that, yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because you're teaching it.
Oh, I still teach banishing.
Oh, I see. Can you say
Yeah.
more about that?
I would still would advise people to do it. I'm not the callous cowboy. You still go through it. I mean, I really emphasize spiritual hygiene. And for instance, if you're just getting into ritual, I would say open with the lesser banishing, close with the lesser banishing. But I would also emphasize on the other point that I've made there about the more you think about this, and like the same with cursing, the more you think about it, you're going to get yourself in a very, very dangerous loop. Same with banishing. So let's step back. I really want to emphasize, I'm not saying go do this Goetia, don't worry about anything. No, 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 not at all, not at all. But also don't overthink it. If you know the very much the if you've done the magic, it's worked, right? If you've done it, it's fine because you can get into this like, oh, I didn't draw up the when I did the lesser banishing ritual, I didn't connect the lines perfectly, or I didn't intone the name. Like, calm down, go through because the more you do it, the more it will come along. So I'm not saying don't do it, but also the more you do banishing, the more you keep up your spiritual hygiene, the more you're going to understand when something's a bit icky, when you need to light some Palo Santo or whatever it might be. I'm not, no, I should emphasize that. I'm not just saying do anything you want. I mean, there's plenty of books that would say that. I mean, large amount of chaos magic would say you don't need to do anything like this. Uh, whether or not it's, chaos magic would say you're just using some model of protection and it actually doesn't matter what you use. The metaph I always basically always emphasize in the school that the metaphysics is over to you, right? Like the whole but what actually is it? I don't know. But yeah, I'm not I'm not certainly not teaching people not to banish and not to cleanse.
That's a good clarification, yeah. Thank you
Yeah,
for adding that.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I have two more quick fire
okay,
questions. I mean, they're quick for me to say.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
not quick to answer. We talked a bit before about your intellectual side and your master's degree and you've written books and engaged in philosophy
Hmm.
for many years after your master's too. Were you ever tempted to do a PhD or anything like that? Seems like the sort of thing people do in your position.
Finally, a question I can give you a quick answer to. I got to the application stages of two PhDs. Of what, like one, there was one time I was going to do it on Kant or something, and then the next time I was trying to find to do it on Gurdjieff and something. And both of those times, I got a month into, putting everything together, and I was like, I'm going to absolutely hate these things that I love. I just didn't, and I now have no interest into it. So there was a little draw at some point, but no.
Right. What do you think the draw was, and why do you think what was that certainty that you'd hate it if you did it?
Um, the draw, I think, was maybe seeing academia through. Like, got not too many people stop at a master's. I don't know. That didn't used to be the case anyway. So seeing it through, I mean, ultimately becoming a doctor would be a nice addition to the name. Um, the exhaustion was that just being the way that it was required to approach the things I'd loved was suddenly not, it was like, okay, it's really not about the interest anymore. It's about this weird proving or proof of your, I don't know, I can't explain it, but I remember just thinking like I can't even see the thing I loved anymore already, and I haven't even got onto the it was, I think in both cases it was like, oh, you haven't used you haven't, because you have to do your, I can't remember what it's called, like, but application of what the idea is, and even that's quite long. And it was like your footnotes and reference bibliography. In both cases, they said to me, you haven't used like very recent, uh, the latest scholarship. That's what I was looking for. And it was kind of, I remember thinking, well, one, I'm not in. Like, how would I know? They had this idea that everyone's got access. Like, no one's reading your peer-reviewed article. Like, I don't even know it exists. And then that gave me this feeling of like, uh, I this isn't about any of this. This is about some brown nosing, basically. I just didn't want it. Bad feeling. There you go.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my last quick fire question to you is, you've mentioned a few names throughout our conversation, Alan Chapman, John Michael Greer, and some others too, were names you brought up quite a bit. What do you think of those two guys, first of all? And have you ever had a sort of teacher or mentor, some people you've consulted with closely to do with your own private practice or path or something like that in a sort of one-on-one or small group context? I'm curious about. We didn't touch on that.
I mean, I chatted to Alan Chapman at one time. I'm really rate the Baptist's Head for its transparency. Greer, so John Michael Greer, obviously I've interviewed Greer so many times. And I met Greer in Glastonbury last year. Really good guy. He doesn't mentor people. He doesn't, so. But I would consider Greer a friend of a sort. I mean, we've spoken so many times, and we do speak, a bit longer on the phones when we have our chat. But he's just a good guy. As for my own, mentor or one-on-ones, I there's been odds and sods. So in the Gurdjieff work, I won't name names; they're all so private. But the say the person in charge there, because there wasn't even a title of leader or anything, but they were very developed and pretty helpful, you say. There was a time when I was part of a small group online that actually doesn't need to be said, but that doesn't need to be said what it was or who it was, but that was a lesson in itself of like where this can end up. No, not not that face you're making, not that bad, but just like there was a good lesson in that sense of like guru stuff, and what you're looking for, you could say. Like, oh, this is kind of not my thing, but it's given me some direction as to what I'd actually be interested in. I have found I'm so more skeptical of groups and gurus and anything like that than I am sympathetic. I'm always going to err on the side of caution. For me as a man, it's a lot easier, but immediately, because I can just rock up and I don't have to worry about certain, let's be honest here, sexual abuse or grooming, not as much. But my point being is that I'm so hesitant because of all of that, because I really am almost firmly on the side of you have to have the courage to stand alone. There's really no one else there's no one else who knows what you want. There's no one else who's lived your life. There's no one else who's going to have the discipline. There's no one else who's going to get you through. There's no one else who's going to sit down and read the books. And I think at most we can help each other. We can kind of be there, but you've got to go off and you've got to do it yourself. You've got to sit on the mat. It's going to be your experience. Your experience is the ultimate authority at the end of the day. And I do think it's largely a solo journey. Now, the pitfall of a solo journey is that there are times in your spiritual journey, more often than not, when you are going to need some outside force, let's say, to say, sit down on the mat and we need to get you in because otherwise it's going to get uncomfortable and you're going to bugger off because you'd rather not go through the discomfort. That's fine. I've had periods of that where you've needed that. But more often than not, what I found was people who didn't hang up when they'd got the message, and they'd got the message 10 years ago. And then it had calcified, and now that calcification had meant that they'd really internalized that this is the only path. And the more you go that way is stronger calcification. The more you go the other way can be bad because you can end up flitting. But there is a sort of middle ground where you sort of move somewhere, have the phone call, have the conversation metaphorically. Got the point, put down the phone. Move on, move on. A sort of nomadic approach that's in between. That's kind of my approach. Another thing on groups is that, like with the Gurdjieff work, I would now, in terms of if a group is based around someone's teachings, if that person is dead, I don't know if it's be wary, basically, because there's people cashing in. I have a talk again in the foundations course. I think it's talk 5 called Gurus and Cults and telling people what to look out for. So I'm very hesitant about the whole space. And one big lesson is people can be enlightened and they can also be assholes at the same time. Many things can be true at the same time. So someone can be very, very spiritually developed. They can be an asshole. They can also be this is the uncomfortable one. They can be spiritually developed and still be abusive. That's the one that's very difficult to untangle. But in the same way, someone can be, and that's not me justifying it, by the way. I'm just saying those things can be true all at the same time. And it just gets very difficult to unpick, which is why I would err on the side of, I don't know if you do need anyone. It's only your journey. Be wary. I'm like so wary. It's one of the places I'm really wary because you hear bad things more than you do good, unfortunately, when it comes to groups and group work. Yeah. I went off on a bit of a tangent away from your question, but like throwing in warnings, I think. I feel like if spiritual teaching is anything, it's being able to just get people to avoid the pitfalls you avoided. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to have to do a load of work. It's just like, I wasted a load of time there. That was a big drain on, I don't know, my whatever. That inflated my ego, like helping avoid pitfalls so you can kind of get the false crap out of the way, and it's like, right, finally you can work. Because you could end up on a complete detour for years. For what? And that's why and again in the school, come back to the question for everyone, like, what do you want? If you can stay with that question, you'll probably be okay, because you might end up in this journey in front of someone who's enlightened, who's got that energy that will make you fall asleep and you'll feel absolute bliss. What I say in the course, excuse my crass language, but this is how I phrase it, is you're in front of an enlightened guru who's making you fall asleep and you feel pure bliss. So fucking what? So what? Like, and is that what you wanted? Did you want bliss? Is that got anything to do? Like, are you still unhappy when you leave? Like, what do you want? Did you want this at all? And it's easy to be bowled over, I think, as well. So that's what I'd say on that.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great, really, really amazing, and we've talked about so many things. Is there anything you'd like to? There needn't be, but is there anything you'd like to add as we start to think about wrapping this up? No. We talked a lot. Yeah, it was good.
How long are your episodes normally?
They can be this long. It's unusual. I think it's been it'll almost be maybe 2.5 hours by the time this. Yeah.
Almost 3.
Almost 3, is it? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, fantastic, James. We must do this again sometime. So that's the Hermitage, and of course I'll put all the links below, or you can just look up James Ellis Hermitage or Hermitix on YouTube and find him there. James Ellis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.